We'll start this special meeting of the Public Safety Committee. And we're meeting tonight as a follow-up. Part of what was discussed in the police reform was in regards to body-worn cameras. And as you know, the Board of Supervisors approved purchasing by the Sheriff's Department. Sheriff's Department has the cameras. The company Axon has done all the downloads. They've instituted some training. They've run tests with the cameras. And the Sheriff's Department has developed a policy at this present time before implementation, which is basically word for word or mirrored of the New York State Police Training Council policy. So to get up and running, that's what we're looking to utilize at this point. And that would be further looked into by the Reform Subcommittee, which we also talked about as part of the process. They can, update many things regarding the reform package, but including the body-worn cameras, that policy, whether it's agreed to that updates need to be added, but that's at a later time when the chairman establishes that committee. We're here tonight to discuss the current policy and whether we're comfortable with that. So I see Tistria is on the move. So
hands-free on my speakerphone in my car.
All right, who would like to start?
Jean Mettler has her hand up.
Okay, Jean. You're on mute, Jean. You're on mute.
Jean, unmute yourself.
I said some brilliant things just now that you will never hear. So yeah, I wanted to ask a couple of questions because I was a little confused about what the status is right now. I guess it's a question for the sheriff. Are the cameras currently being used? Because I saw in an email someplace here, I'll have to take a look at it, an email from March 30th saying is attached is the current body camera policy currently being used by my agency. So I left the last meeting thinking that the cameras weren't going to be used until we had a policy. So just fill me in on that.
Yeah, Jeannie, we had test and evaluate cameras out there. So we had to have a policy up for that. And when we were testing the Axons, when we were testing the data 911s, we were testing all the different ones that we were doing. So right now, all the other cameras are in, they're ready to go. Again, the software has been downloaded. Axon came and they did their training. We're ready to go with it and ready to roll them out to every single deputy out on the street.
Okay. All right, good. So that's the first part of my question. The second part, though, is looking over this policy. I understand this is also the model policy for the DCJS, right? It's all the same, isn't it?
Yes, it's the DCJS MPTC, which is the
right.
Police Council, which is comprised of many different people. It's not just a couple of people. Hey, go make a policy.
Right.
Many different agencies, and it's a pretty in-depth group to get into. It's hard.
Yeah. No, I think there's a lot of good thinking here, but I'm just wondering, I see that under purpose, it says law enforcement agencies are encouraged to customize these protocols to meet their agency's needs while being mindful of the intent of the policy. So my reading this through, there were a lot of places where I thought it was inviting further detail, and it's really just a starting point, right? So I wonder, did you customize it at all, or what we're looking at now, which says Columbia County Sheriff's body worn cameras, is that what you're proposing? In other words, it looks to me like it's just a starting point and really needs a lot more work before it's an actual policy.
The cut and paste, Jeannie, literally. We took the state policy, cut it and pasted it in for this. This is why we're having these discussions as far as what else can we add, take out, et cetera, to this policy. And as we did through police reform, just talk about it and get ideas to see what we can do as far as, again, what we can add to this policy or what we can take away from the policy.
Okay, yeah, because I'm comfortable with it as a starting point, but only for an interim and fairly brief period of time, I think, that because we really need to get some more details here that work for us. So
Correct.
thank you.
Okay, Jeannie, thank you.
Tistria has her hand up, Mike.
Tistria.
Hey, so yeah, I agree with Jeannie. I'm comfortable, you know, I would only vote for it if we were clear actually in the motion that it is an interim and temporary policy and that the implementation committee will be, you know, reviewing. Do we have an idea, Chairman Morrell, as to, you know, 30 days, 60 days, when we might think that that implementation committee, because if we're talking an interim policy for 9 months, I'm less comfortable. If we're talking about 30 to 60 to 90 days, I'm much more comfortable. Do we have a idea of when that process could start?
Put it back on.
I'm sorry, I was on mute. My plan is to appoint the implementation committee by the board meeting or at the board meeting. So we'll have that. I'm not so
Perfect.
sure about the citizen review committee, but we'll definitely have the implementation committee appointed this month.
Awesome. And I think we could make it a priority since we're using the body cameras, that could be kind of one of the first tasks of the
Mr. Chairman?
implementation committee.
I'm sorry, who's that?
Yes. Yes, District Attorney Chaika.
Yeah, is it true that Supervisor Hoteling is driving while she speaks?
Yeah, yes.
Yes, I'm hands-free through my speakerphone, being held by a cup phone holder and through my audio speakers.
Well, I would submit that that's very problematic. And I would ask her to pull over and stop the distracted driving so that the county is not liable when and if an accident occurs.
Okay, my apologies. My understanding was that hands-free driving was legal.
Okay.
All right, I did have two other questions, Chairman Benvenuto. I am pulled over on the side of the road. Did everyone have a chance to look at Supervisor Chimidi's policy supplement that he sent out? Because I think there's a lot of good points in here. And I guess my question is, are we looking to take this model policy and amend it slightly now and then have the implementation committee revisit it? Because that's what I thought I heard Sheriff Bartlett just say. Or are we really looking to adopt this, you know, cut and pasted policy as a very interim basis and then take some of the ideas that Supervisor Chimidi's laid out into the implementation committee?
I think the latter would be my view.
Okay. So my only request then is number 8 out of Supervisor Chimidi's document. It says opt out of all data sharing agreements with Axon. My understanding is that it's a very easy online, Sheriff Bartlett would go into our online account and check a box that would say we do not share our data with you. I do defer to like the DA's office and others on the call, but I would think that sharing data with Axon would not be something we would want to do.
So I'll let Lou speak to that, because I've asked about this already, and the way it was explained to me, the current contract and agreement with Axon, it's similar to your cell phone use. If Apple analyzes information from your cell phone as you're using it, but I'll let Lou speak to that.
Thank you, Chairman Benvenuto. You're exactly correct. The data sharing, I'm not sure, what the issue with data sharing is. Axon does not use our video or our audio for any redistribution or any personal use or any advertisement or anything without our consent. They simply use the data to help improve their product, similar to what Apple does when you share your data with Apple for analytical purposes. It's just to improve the technology and improve the data. They constantly make upgrades to the software and to the hardware, and they base a lot of that on the data sharing that they receive from the agencies around the world.
Okay, thank you.
And I just want to remind people too, it's policy and procedures that exist through, obviously, DCJS, New York State DCJS, that we talked about, but there's specifics that aren't necessarily in the policy, as when the camera is activated, how the camera is activated, the time frames, the recording, certain information that would involve the district attorney's office, which is why I invited them here today, as far as evidentiary matters. And so, if anybody had questions about that, I just wanted you to know that that's not specifically in the policy, but it does exist. I don't know who was first, Kelly.
Rob
Yeah.
Beery, Supervisor Beery was first, then Chimides, then Adams.
Okay.
I did have an opportunity late this afternoon to take a quick look at Supervisor Committee's memo to us. I thought it was an interesting document loaded with stuff that is worthy of a conversation, 2 or 3, and involving all the different parties. I don't see how we could do that tonight. So I think that the standard policy is okay to roll out, and I agree with Supervisor Hoefling that it's an interim policy, and that when the implementation committee gets together, we can start to look at these specific issues. I frankly am not aware of how the agency works and all the ramifications with the standard policy versus what Supervisor Chimides is proposing, and I don't know what the consequence would be if any of these things were implemented in Columbia County, which is why I would prefer to take it a little bit slower and see what we need to do, because once you make a change to a policy, it really doesn't float well if you have to change it back because you made a mistake. So I'd like to have a conversation on each of these points once that implementation committee is put together.
Okay. Supervisor Chimides.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I definitely invite a longer conversation about the 8 recommendations I had pulled together, and I would also like to, really invite Theo Anthony, who serves on the Hudson Police Reform Committee. He's been studying body camera policy and body camera implementation for years. He's done the trainings. He's been to the factory floor. He knows a lot of information. I think it'd be really helpful to bring in some of the local experts who've been working on this. And I think there's a lot of information about all of these. I would like to reiterate just the one point on Axon data sharing. I would default to being let's not share our data until we know more. My understanding is that we're not contractually obligated to share that data. I actually often don't share my data with Apple and don't share my data with Google. In essence, our our officers are going to be going around filming all kinds of stuff. And I think we want to err on the side of privacy for our people. I guess I haven't seen exactly contractually what we're allowing Axon to do, but my understanding is that it's potentially a serious privacy issue. They use their departmental data to, quote, train their next generation of automated software that utilizes machine learning, but we don't necessarily know what else they use it for. And so I think we want to err on the side of not sharing our data if we're not required to until we know more. And I guess I haven't seen the exact specifications of what they're using, but we frequently see things around big data and around companies that are misusing this kind of data. And I don't see why we would do that for all of our citizens to give that to Axon.
Well, Captain Bray, is it video and things of that nature? Are they just testing the cameras themselves?
I can reach out to the Axon representative to try and find out more specifics about what analytics they actually perform with the data. My understanding through conversation with the rep when we were doing the training last week was that it's purely analytical. They develop tools and software such as redaction, automated redaction, and things like this that help us help police agencies and municipalities deal with the audio and video that's captured on these cameras. And without the agencies sharing the data with them, it would be impossible for them to improve their product and help us with those tools and with the features that come with the body cameras.
All right. Well, if you could just please find out in detail from them what they're looking to use. And okay.
Could I ask a question, please? So this actually, I understand completely the concern here with privacy, but does that also act like a backup storage spot for this information also in case something should happen to the video? I mean, I don't know what kind of data is being collected, frankly, and I'm ignorant. Please bear with me. But if there's a video recording, an audio recording, and it goes to Axon, and then something should happen to that camera, right? Is there a way to retrieve that information that was given to them? And if we block them, did we lose that ability? I would ask that the captain, look into that as well.
Yeah.
It's my understanding is that the contract that we have with Axon, that is like the standard contract that Axon provides, is that we're getting data storage in the same way that you could like contract with Google or Apple to get data storage. But that's different than saying you're allowed to use our data. So you're allowed to store our data so we can have access to it, but we're not giving you access to use it for your own purposes. And it's also my understanding is that Axon has like a proprietary sort of lockbox on how they use the data. So you're really offering them a set of trust that we're not contractually obligated to. It doesn't really give us any clear benefit other than the sort of like future prediction that maybe services would be improved in a way that we don't necessarily understand. And I think especially in this moment to give that kind of trust, especially the intimacy of just all of the footage of around Columbia County to a company during the sort of when we know that companies frequently use this big data information in ways that don't always benefit the public. The Congress is going through all kinds of sort of like antitrust things around big data and how frequently they misuse this data. And it just doesn't seem like a real benefit to our public to do that, especially without a real clear benefit.
You make a very good case.
So yeah, let's just get more clarity on
We
that.
need some more clarity there, though.
Yeah, and
But you make a very good case here.
also correct me if I'm wrong, Captain. We're starting out with county server for storage.
We were on a county server for our car, camera, video, and audio.
Okay.
The Axon contract allows for straight cloud storage from their product and their recordings.
Okay.
So we will migrate from our local storage to the cloud at some point for everything.
Supervisor.
I would also go ahead.
I'll come back to you, Mike.
Yeah.
Are you ready?
Yep.
Okay, so I have a couple of questions, and I'm a guest to your committee, and I understand that I may not be as informed as many of you, but I did follow this reasonably closely, and I'm wondering if by adopting this policy or recommending that we adopt this policy tonight, that we're meeting the expectation of the public. Because I believe the public, at least as I was a member of the public, expected that the implementation committee would be the body that would be doing the rough draft of a policy. So I wonder how they'll feel about a policy being adopted prior to an appointment and a meeting of that committee. And my other question along those lines are, what are the consequences of waiting? If it's 30 to 60 days, what are the consequences of waiting for the implementation committee to take a shot at this, both positive and negative? Are there good reasons to move forward, or are there good reasons to wait? And then I have two other questions which are related to this: is what will the officers train to, and who will retrain them if we adopt a more comprehensive policy going forward? Does the contract include additional training or retraining if that training is more comprehensive?
Captain, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I can say that I was part of the police reform committee meetings. I attended every one as a member of the sheriff's office. And I can say that, as has been mentioned already a couple of times tonight, this is an interim policy. The county's invested a lot of money in these body cameras for transparency, and we don't want to shelve transparency right now. We want to use it, because if we shelve this for 60 days, 90 days, 6 months, however long it takes for the implementation committee to make a policy or advise us on a policy that we should use, we could potentially miss something and miss out on an opportunity to have that either for our benefit or for someone else's benefit. So the model use policy is merely interim in nature. It would only serve a purpose of us having some procedure in place for the short term until a long-term policy is developed and implemented. So to answer the question, there is a detriment to putting it on hold. We have these devices. We have been trained. The deputies have been trained. They're issued to all the deputies. We're waiting to start using them. And there's no reason to not use them immediately with the interim policy while we work on something long-term, because we never know what we're going to miss if they're sitting on a shelf somewhere for months.
So were they trained? One of Michael's recommendations is that the buffer mode to record the video and audio be set at 120 seconds. What were they trained to?
The industry standard is 30 seconds of pre-record buffer. That's the industry standard from Axon and others, which is currently our policy on our police car camera systems. It's a 30-second buffer. And again, I think those issues certainly can be addressed in more detail with the implementation subcommittee. I think that the interim policy will only get us to that point, because right now there's a lot of questions to be answered about the buffer, whether there's audio, whether there's video, how long. I think those things could last on and linger for weeks, if not months, while we decide what's best for our agency in Columbia County. But the agency standard or the industry standard is 30 seconds. Pre-record video, no audio.
If I could just add something quickly, this is Matt. Two things, first of all, whatever we develop, the district attorney's office is going to have to weigh in on in terms of a policy. And I said this earlier to Supervisor Hoagland. I'm guessing that the sheriff's deputies union is going to have to weigh in or will weigh in on whatever policy we develop. So, and they have in the past, if I'm correct, Captain Ray and Sheriff Bartlett.
Yes, they have, Mr. Chairman.
That's correct.
So this is a process, and we're going to have to work through that process. So.
Yeah, I'll just say this. I'm one vote, but what we have here is a policy, obviously, that was developed through New York State Criminal Justice Services. Other municipalities utilize this policy. Some of those municipalities add to the policy. What Supervisor Chimides forwarded was Hudson Police Department. It does not necessarily mean that the county Sheriff's Department or the county's going to follow specifically what the Hudson Police Department does. I've asked Captain Bray to find out from other surrounding agencies, Capital District, Hudson Valley, what have you, what they utilize. But I am comfortable instituting this interim policy, which has been developed by our Sheriff's Department, mirrors what New York State Division of Criminal Justice Services says, and the duly elected official, Sheriff Bartlett, is comfortable with this policy. So that's, just my opinion. And we've already addressed that we will work on this more moving forward. That's without question. We've established that now. So, and we'll gather even more information. So that's my viewpoint. Supervisor Mettler.
Yeah, I would like to speak very strongly in support of adopting an interim policy tonight so that the cameras can be used as quickly as possible. I think the flip side of that is that this is just a generic policy. It really requires further work, and there may be parts of it that are changed. There may be lots of parts of it that are continued. But I don't, and I hope that we will work expeditiously to review this policy. That being said, what I think is critical is that we begin to use these cameras as soon as possible for all the reasons that we all know too well.
Thank you.
I think I should just say, I will say that the cameras, I voted in favor of them when we had these discussions, whatever that was in December. They work to the benefit of all concerned. Thank you.
Okay, let me see. Supervisor Adams.
So my question is really for you, Jeannie, because you were on the committee. Do you think then that this will meet the public expectation? Because I've had several calls yesterday and today from people who said, who were concerned that a policy was being pushed through without the formation of a committee. And so based on what Captain Bray has said, and what you've said and others have said, which I support, we have the cameras. It's important to get them in use as soon as possible. And so we're doing that, I think, to some degree at the expense of public trust, because I think we created a different expectation that's not being met. And I just want to make sure that you are comfortable with that. So if the whole group is comfortable with that, then I'll take it back to the people that have called and said, this is a way to get the cameras in service as soon as possible. And that, and we will make the commitment, we'll meet the commitment that we made with the passage of the plan. Is that how you think I should summarize it?
Unmute, Jean.
I absolutely feel comfortable with it.
Okay.
And what needs to be explained is that this is, number one, it's interim. Number two, if you read it, it says, law enforcement agencies are encouraged to customize these protocols to meet their agency's needs while being mindful of the intent of the policy. So this policy sets some pretty high standards for us to live up to, but it also invites amendment and editing and suiting it to our purposes and the sensibilities of our community. But I have no concern that we're jumping the gun or that anyone should feel that we haven't heard the public's concerns.
Okay, thank you.
The other thing, just quick, I want to state that, as I'm looking through this policy, I got to the end, and this is the actual policy as it, as the Sheriff's Department drew it up, again, mirroring what existed through DCJS, but it states at the end, part of this policy is conducting annual review of the policy and procedures contained herein, and for making recommendations for any necessary amendments thereto. Well, we're going to start that process with, an implementation committee, which will be not annual. It's going to start soon. So I found that interesting too, and I was glad to see that in there.
If they're really ambitious, it could start as soon as next week.
Supervisor Chimides.
Yeah, I just wanted to stress the effectiveness of body cameras and the effectiveness of building trust with the community is really dependent on having a good or a great policy. And if you look at some of the conflicts that have happened around the country, they've often been body camera footage has actually been involved. And so having a body camera is not necessarily enough to determine what happened, and it's not necessarily enough to build trust with communities. And oftentimes there's sort of been real uproar when there was an incident, a use of force, and there was a body camera, but there wasn't a real clear release policy. It wasn't clear when does the body camera footage get released, and that causes a lot of frustration with the public, where they know there's footage and then they can't get access to the footage, and there's not a clear release policy. And I don't know if the model policy really specifies how footage gets released, and also questions around pre-roll. How much is it pre-recording? And so if we have a 30-second pre-recording and an incident happened and potentially, we only record 30 seconds, will that also not build trust? Because people are going to say, well, why didn't they record for 2 minutes? I know that, some people might say that it's the industry standard, but it's my understanding is that it's the technology default. So that's what Axon sort of presets you at 30 seconds. And I think you can just go into the system and change it to a minute, change it to 2 minutes. It doesn't cost any extra sort of part of the contract. And if you like body cameras, I don't see why you wouldn't want additional footage for the same reason we want to hurry up, get the stuff on the streets. It seems like we want as much pre-recording as possible. And that's going to build trust too, right? Is to say we're using our body cameras to the fullest. And I haven't seen any studies that say that 30 seconds is the right amount. So I don't see why we wouldn't just go to the longest one we can. And so I do think the stakes are really high that we do a good job. And I think if we're talking about a week or two here or there, I guess, we can have an interim policy, but I think ultimately having a bad body camera policy is a serious risk to our public.
Supervisor Hoatling.
Yeah, I'd like to agree with what Supervisors Bury, Benvenuto, and Metler said, that an interim temporary policy to get the cameras out on the streets is a good idea. I very much like what Supervisor Chimides has to say, and I think that he makes a lot of great points, and I agree with Supervisor Bury that we really need to dig into that. I would like to throw a potential motion out there that I think would address everyone's concerns and also get the cameras out there. So I'm just going to throw it out to see if it might work for everyone. So my motion would be to approve policy 012B as proposed by the Columbia County Sheriff's Office as a temporary and interim policy for body-worn cameras, with the understanding that within the next 60 days, the implementation committee will begin the process of creating a long-term policy. And so, if it's going to be created at the board, that gives, 45 days after it's created for that committee to meet and start discussions. We're not putting a timeline on when the policy is going to be replaced, but it would let us know within 60 days, we're going to revisit this interim policy and we're going to start creating a longer term policy. So I just wanted to throw that out as a motion that I think addresses Supervisor Chimides' concerns, Supervisor Adams' concerns, and just see if that had any traction with this group.
Okay, we have a motion.
I'll make the
I would
second.
second that.
Before it's voted on, can I have a say?
Sure.
This motion needs to be amended for the simple reason that the sheriff's office is the one, and myself and my command staff are the ones that set policy for my agency. Having the implementation as far as the subcommittee and working together with the sheriff's office and with the different ideas that are out there, that's how this go about. The Board of Supervisors does not set policy for this agency. We work very closely with the Board of Supervisors. We take into consideration everything that the Board of Supervisors say. And we absolutely, just like police reform, we are welcoming to anything that is brought into this, but the board does not set policy for the sheriff's office.
Thank
If
you,
I
Sheriff.
could-
I will amend my
could.
motion. Oh, yep.
I just want to, support Sheriff Bartlett's statement here. We all need to keep in mind that they have to run an agency and they got a lot more on their plate than we can even imagine because none of us are police officers, which is why the implementation committee will get together and dig deeper on this stuff. And I know for a fact that the sheriff is going to have representation on that implementation committee, and we have to listen to their counsel as well as the district attorney. Before we decide as civilians what's the best policy is, and then give it to the sheriff and say, hey, we'd like you to run with this. They know what they're doing. Okay? And we're civilians, and we're just trying to help them out as best we can for our constituents. That's really the bottom line for me. So I will listen to the the revised motion, and we'll go from there.
All right, Sheriff Bartlett, would it work to revise the motion to say a motion authorizing the use of body worn cameras per the policy set forth by the sheriff's office numbered 012B as a temporary and interim policy, with the understanding that the implementation committee and the sheriff will work together within 60 days on coming up with a revised policy?
That's very good, Supervisor Holding. Thank you.
Did we say 60 days we're coming up with a policy, or we're going to start discussing it within 60 days?
Start working on it within 60 days.
Okay, and we also have to keep in mind that we have a union out there that we have to bring it to as well. Okay, so we may say this, that, and the other thing, and the union may say, well, we're not going to agree to that. So there's a lot more on the table here, but
I would,
And
I
And
would
my
second
motion
it
is just
as
saying we'll
amended.
begin the process of working on it within 60
Begin the
days,
process.
but it could be a long process. Yep.
a lot of different moving parts in here too.
Captain, did you have something to say?
I did. I just wanted to be careful and let everybody understand too that the interim policy 012B is strictly interim. So I don't want to, pigeonhole us into saying this is the policy that we'll work on in the future. Our plan is to integrate this in with our in-car camera system policy and make them both similar so that we have the same parameters for the car video as we do for body worn cameras. So we will be integrating them at some point, which will end up being a different policy number. It will be our, camera policy altogether.
Okay, so we have a motion and we have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, I think we've agreed to this interim policy. And the chairman can make his announcement at the board meeting next week.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
so am I assuming I'm good to go with putting these cameras on the streets ASAP?
yes.
Thank you, sir.
Supervisor Mussman has her hand up. Chairman.
Supervisor Mussman?
Yeah, I would just like to offer the inclusion of the Public Defender's Office in this conversation as well.
Okay.
I think it would
Okay.
be
For-
helpful.
For the committee too, yes, in
Yes.
the DA's office, of course. I mean, in terms of releasing and all that, I mean, the DA's office has to be involved. It could involve evidence or in that regard, so,
So thank you. I understand that, but you've not really brought them into the picture, and I just want to remind that they should be here too. Thank you.
okay. All right, anything else? Hopefully not.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you. Good night.
Have a good night.
All right.